Hello everyone and welcome to my Retro Media Room. Today we're taking a look at 5 more PlayStation 3 games that are still stuck on the PlayStation 3. We're going to take a look at gameplay, I'm going to give you my thoughts and analysis, and we're going to have some fun. If you like this sort of content, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to keep up with my videos. Please hit the like button to help me with the algorithm. Share it with your friends, especially if you have some PlayStation 3 enthusiasts you know. And absolutely, please comment on the video. I read every single comment. I love engaging with you all. I love hearing your stories and memories and your enthusiasm for these games. It's a lot of fun. And with that, we'll get started. And the first game we're looking at is Resistance 2, developed by Insomniac Games and released by Sony. So Resistance 2 takes place immediately after the first title, where you continue to play as Nathan Hale, who is now battling the Chimera at home in America. While the first game had quite a bit of a World War II aspect to it, fighting in Europe, this, on the other hand, has more of a War of the Worlds or Resident Evil horror feel to it, which I really like. To add to that, you can only carry 2 primaries at a time now rather than a whole arsenal, so that also changes the dynamics here. While normally you would think I would complain about that, in this case, I actually appreciate it. It differentiates itself from the other 2. The game is darker, scarier, and more intense across the board. The visual quality here is outstanding, with details and models and animations better across the board from the first game. Water effects here are outstanding, which really lend to the creepiness of the Chimerian Furies that swim around hunting you down. You get in the water with these, you will instantly die. It really reminded me of the zombie sharks in Resident Evil and how terrifying they are. Sprawling, epic backgrounds with tons of detail and animations going on. This is stuff that you don't even see in 2024 very much. The only issue I ran into with the visuals are the motion blur and depth of field effects. There's a visual bug where the blur of the motion blur stays stuck on the screen, either blurring the image or just straight up blinding you. So I highly recommend you turn that off. And what's nice is even when you turn it off, there's still an inherent motion blur that looks fine, just without the visual bug. Then you have the depth of field that pretty much just make you feel like you need glasses. It's not very well implemented, so once you turn that off, everything just looks much more clear. All of these are in the bonus options. I highly recommend you go in there and find them and shut them off. Makes the game much more playable. Once again, like the first game, every weapon has a creative secondary fire mode, which makes sense since this is from the creators of the Ratchet & Clank series. So the guns look and feel fantastic, better than ever since the first one. So you take the fact that it feels like Resident Evil, you can only carry 2 primaries, so you're having to manage your ammo more and be more selective with what weapons you carry depending on the situation. Situations such as invisible monsters running around popping out to get you and the shotgun being the best option to take them out before they can get you. Monsters popping out of the woods after you've been running around, it's been somewhat quiet. Where it's not always just guns blazing, there's actual atmosphere here, a little bit more foreboding. You don't know what's going to happen next, what monster's going to come out. Everything having that 1950s aesthetic, so there's a little bit of a nostalgic monster movie feel to it as well. I really love those elements about this game. Even though this has its fair share of larger scale battles, I like the fact that this has its own unique feel from the first game. It stands out on its own. And to top everything off, this game has epic boss battles, while somewhat frustrating at times, but still very cool boss battles. One in particular that I'm not showing here that you should absolutely check out if you play the game. It's pretty mind-blowing for the time. So for the longest time, Resistance 2 is actually my favorite Resistance. Now I'm kind of on the fence because all 3 are so different from each other. But I've always really loved this game though. This blew me away back when I played it in the day. As much as I love the first one, I actually do prefer this one a little bit more. Just because I'm such a Resident Evil survival horror fan. So this kind of edges out the first one for me. But yeah, Resistance 2, if you've never played it, I highly recommend you check it out. And to conclude the trilogy, we're going to take a look at Resistance 3, developed by Insomniac Games and released by Sony. What I truly appreciate about the Resistance games is how different they are from each other. The first game being in Europe and feeling a little bit more like World War II, the second game being in America, feeling more like Resident Evil and War of the Worlds, and now the third game also being in America but feeling more post-apocalyptic. It's been years, the war has dragged on, much of humanity has lost and is just trying to survive, hiding away from the Chimera, who are continuing to try and eradicate the rest of humanity. In this game, you play as Joseph Capelli with your wife and son, and your wife is actually the adopted sister of Nathan Hale. You start off in Midwest Oklahoma with the goal of making it cross-country to New York as a last-ditch effort to try to end the war. One way you could look at the Resistance trilogy is the first game is war and the beginning of battle, the second game is the horror of war, and then now this game is the bleakness of war. But yet there's still a glimmer of hope. Hence them trying to make it cross-country to New York and finally defeat the Chimera and end the war. The apocalyptic feeling of being surrounded by destruction and refugees. The NPCs have quite a bit of dialogue and talking amongst themselves and to you, your wife, and your sick son. You combine all these things and it makes it feel very different from the first two games. In addition to all this, the graphics here are absolutely phenomenal. Some of the best graphics on the PlayStation 3 and some of the best graphics of that entire generation. You'll hear me say that more than once. The particle effects, the textures, animations, the spectacle and scale, you name it, this game is absolutely fantastic. And I have to mention, the snowflake effects are some of the best I've ever seen in any game to date. Why can't they get this right at anything else? My only technical complaint is actually in the sound department. It's not the quality of the sound, it's the consistency of the timing of the sound. This game is so ambitious, it seems like it needed a little bit more time in the oven, because when things kick off in action scenes, there's a delay of the sound very often. Now, once the action gets going, the sound kind of catches up and comes back and is fine. But you'll notice this a lot at the beginning of scenes, such as this.
See him? That auger will shoot straight through the rock.
So as you can see, it's not perfect, it's not the end of the world, but I wanted to mention it. Otherwise, the motion blur and depth of field issues from the second game have been fixed here, so that's not a problem anymore. The aim down sights mechanics are better than ever, where you actually have proper dot sights, the controls are great, the guns feel great. The frame rate's going to be a little slower because there's a lot of ambition here, so I can't fault it too much for that because, man, this game is super ambitious. But it's not bad, it still has a pretty decent frame rate for how much is going on. Also, the cutscenes are quite a bit different in this one. They use a lot of animation to convey them, which is mostly a stylistic thing, but also probably cheaper to do, so it's okay. The story, the action, the spectacle and scale, this game is phenomenal. Very solid end to an awesome trilogy. I love all three games, and I certainly love part 3 here. So if you've never played any of the Resistance games, whether it be 1, 2, or 3, I mean, you just can't go wrong with any of them, but it is a all-encompassing, cohesive story. So certainly you want to start with 1, then 2, and 3, and experience the whole trilogy for yourself with all the characters and things that happen. Phenomenal trilogy. I wish they would bring these back to modern hardware in some way. Maybe one day they will, but I guess we just have to keep bugging Sony until they revive their own franchise. Resistance 3, highly recommended. Up next, we're finishing another trilogy, Killzone 3, developed by Guerrilla Games and released by Sony. Yet again, we're treated to one of the most beautiful games of that entire generation, pushing the PlayStation 3 to its absolute limits. While the second game is a little darker and kind of had more of an emphasis on lighting and shadows, this one is bigger, brighter, and badder. But certainly just more of what you've come to expect after the second one. Gorgeous animations, gun models, particle effects, action sequences, you name it, this game is phenomenal. Some of the improvements to list on this game over the second one are the tighter controls. They fine-tuned the analog a lot better. Also, they gave you the option to turn off motion control, so now if you use a third-party controller, you're not going to get stuck on those segments where you have to use the 6-axis in order to progress. So that's very nice. This game is the epitome of epic set pieces in a first-person shooter, the absolute showcase for the PlayStation 3. What's also nice is that at least Rico is along for the ride through much of this campaign. The second one was sorely lacking, the fact that they were just merely in the background. The characters from the first game that I loved were absent, but at least Rico's here now, so that does help. What's also nice is you can now carry 3 weapons at a time. So my gripe from the second game of only being able to carry 2 weapons compared to the first game is somewhat alleviated. But there's still no secondary fire with weapons, so that's still disappointing, and a downgrade from the first game. Minor gripes aside, this is really excellent here. Kind of like Resistance, each game brings its own flavor. The first game, my favorite of the series, excellent campaign, excellent depth of characters and mechanics. The second game brought along the technical prowess, epic gunfights, while a little bit hollow compared to the first game. But the third one kind of brings it all together a little bit, with the better character aspect, tighter controls, bigger, crazier set pieces and battles. Although, like I said, I really did love the darkness and the shadows and the epicness of the lighting in the dark alleys of the second one. I really did like that aspect of it, and that kind of makes it stand on its own. But with higher octane action, bigger, crazier guns, there's even a segment where you're flying around with the jetpack, crazier than ever for the series. So honestly, if you were to ask me which is the more technically impressive game, Resistance 3 or Killzone 3, I don't know, man. They're both really, really impressive, so it's just kind of preference at that point because they're both epic. They're easily 2 of the best looking games on the PlayStation 3. and just blows away most of the competition for that entire generation, particularly with first-person shooters. So yeah, Killzone 3, incredible end to a trilogy, just like Resistance 3. All are fantastic games. Cannot recommend them enough. Next up, we have Twisted Metal, developed by Eat, Sleep, Play, and released by Sony. This was the last Twisted Metal ever developed. It's unfortunate because Twisted Metal is a legendary franchise that's been around since the PlayStation 1. Twisted Metal 2 is a huge fan favorite. I love Twisted Metal 3 a lot myself, but my personal favorite of the series, and arguably the best of the series, is Twisted Metal Black, which this shares the most DNA with, but it's not perfect. While Twisted Metal Black had a vast array of characters, all of them with their own stories and cinematics, which was epic at the time, Twisted Metal Black is a masterpiece. This one, on the other hand, they decided to go with only 3 characters: Sweet Tooth, Mr. Grimm, and Dollface. While those are 3 of the classic characters, of course, Sweet Tooth. And yes, you can place any one of these 3 characters in any of the vehicles that you like, which are all the classic vehicles and then some. A caveat to this, though, is that you're able to select 3 vehicles at a time. You start off with your primary, and as soon as you either get weak or can't find health anymore, you can go to a garage and you can swap it for 2 more. So you have 3 vehicles total, so that's actually pretty fun. But there's just something about the original style where all the characters had their own individual fixed vehicles and their own personalities and their own stories. The 3 stories told in this, while seemingly bigger budget, more epic, just isn't as good. Dollface's story is not as good as Black. There's some decent twists and turns, and it's fairly well done with Sweet Tooth. Mr. Grimm is okay. It's just not as good from a storytelling standpoint and character development point as what they did with Twisted Metal Black at the time. So all of that is pretty inferior to what came before it. But gameplay and graphics, that's where things kick in pretty strongly here. The graphics are really nice. Definitely a showcase for the PlayStation 3. It managed to have a lot of the look and feel of Black, but way more advanced. High octane, a lot of fun, very challenging, which is pretty consistent with the series, to be honest. All the different weapons you're able to select, easy to use special attacks. But what I really love is using Sweet Tooth's ice cream truck and actually finally being able to turn it into a robot. Because to be honest, they teased it in Twisted Metal Black, but it wasn't a proper transformation. This one is, and it's really cool. What they did add to the game are more weapon options. Before, you only have machine guns on your car. Now you can choose a burst fire submachine gun, shotgun, revolver, things like that, so you have options. But what's really cool is that every special attack per vehicle has a secondary mode. So that's a lot of variety with special attacks now. I've got to be honest, the boss battles in this game are not great. They're a little bit frustrating and annoying. So that part I wasn't crazy about. But fighting amongst all the vehicles, the classic combat, destroying the environments, high octane, very fast, and very fun. If you go into this not expecting masterclass level gameplay of Twisted Metal Black, you just simply go in wanting some prettier Twisted Metal, you're going to get that here. Unfortunately, they put too much emphasis on the online aspect of this thing, which is always a finite aspect of any game. So the single player stuff is decent but somewhat limited, but still worth playing, especially as a Twisted Metal fan. So yeah, if you want some vehicle fragging Twisted Metal gameplay, I mean, you can't go wrong with just sticking with the classic Twisted Metal. And the last game on our list is MotorStorm Apocalypse, developed by Evolution Studios and released by Sony. Due to the fact that I don't own MotorStorm Pacific Rift, I decided to skip it for now, go straight to Apocalypse, and maybe when I get the game I'll play it in a future video. So obviously there's going to be quite a delta here with how these games play. The graphics here are what you would come to expect from the franchise, very clean, very detailed, lots going on here, so it's very good. Even more vehicles than before. There's actually a story mode now with dialogue and characters, while pretty tacked on, nothing too special, but it is there. The tracks themselves are pretty insane here, very different from the first game. They evolve and change as you race, with roads moving around and falling apart and destroying themselves. So if you like evolving courses, you can't go wrong here, along with all the chaos and physics you would expect from MotorStorm. And I couldn't believe the amount of customization available in the game. It seems endless. So this game overall, I was very impressed. But I must say, there's a little bit of heart to it that I wasn't liking as much as the first game. The soundtrack here is very forgettable. First game is classic with licensed music. This one is pretty generic. I'm going to try to articulate it, but there is just a certain heart to the racing in the first game that isn't as imagined here, in my opinion. While it's very good, it is quite a bit different. The first game just had a simple and pureness to it that this one just kind of lacks a little bit. It feels a little bit more like other racers. So let me know in the comments if Pacific Rift is more like that. If it's more like the first game, more like this game, let me know what you think, which one you think is the best of the series. But otherwise, I have a lot of high praises for this. It just doesn't separate itself from other racers quite as much as the original did for me. Either way, I would still recommend MotorStorm Apocalypse to anybody who wants a unique racing game or just wants a more over-the-top racing game. I mean, it's in the name, Apocalypse. I mean, it feels like everything is falling apart and destroying itself. It's got over-the-top courses or tracks, and it's really cool. I mean, now in terms of options and meat and potatoes of gameplay and more to do and choose from, there's lots to do here. So if you love that sort of stuff, you're going to dig Apocalypse. So that was 5 PlayStation 3 games that are still stuck on the PlayStation 3. Hopefully some of these will see some remasters, re-releases one day, but until then, we just have to fire up our PlayStation 3s, play them that way, and celebrate them. Or in some cases, emulate, but that's a whole other subject. I hope you liked the video. Please subscribe and like it on your way out. Please comment on the video and tell me what you think. I'd love to hear from you all. If anything else, God bless and have a wonderful day.